really just to give an overview of where we've used competitive dialogue and pre-commercial procurement for procuring intelligent transport systems. So the main purpose of the presentation is the CHARM project. We started in May 2011. It's a collaboration between Highways England and Rijkswaterstaat of the Netherlands. We both look after the road networks in our countries, so the major A roads, as we call them in England, and the motorways. Both of our organisations, we currently operate a large amount of kind of standalone applications which have developed over time. I think it's fair to say that some in Highways England are even as old as 25 years. And over a number of years, Highways England and RWS, we've worked together to solve problems and share knowledge about traffic management and other operational processes. So it seemed a logical next step for us to initiate the CHARM project to address our common problem, which of course is our reliance on standalone and bespoke legacy applications. So the primary aim of CHARM is to implement a modern traffic management solution which we can use as part of an integrated suite to maximise network capacity. Netherlands and England both have the same problems in that there's more cars than ever, but there isn't the kind of capital available just to keep building more and more roads. So CHARM is really to use a technology solution to maximise the road network capacity. Through this collaboration, we intended to attract a wider, more capable supply base, so looking at good practices going on in probably North America and Australia and in the Far East was our primary focus to get those big areas. So in terms of the overarching procurement strategy for delivering CHARM, it was split into a number of component contracts which were published in the OJU notice. The two I'll be touching on today is the CHARM ATMS system provider procurement and the pre-commercial procurement, which is at the bottom. The ATMS system provider procurement is a two-lotted joint procurement via competitive dialogue under the Dutch Procurement Act, where Rijkswaterstaat were acting as the central purchasing body. And this is to deliver a contract per organisation with the same provider. So the assessment was constructed in such a way that it would determine the most economically advantageous tender for both organisations, and that one company would win both contracts. The general scope of that was that the ATMS system provider would install the application in one traffic management centre and two data centre environments per country. And the remainder of that contract would be ongoing licenses and third-line support. The next three contracts are all kind of agency-specific. The rollout contractor is to roll out the ATMS application to remaining TMCs. The operational service manager is to be responsible kind of overall IT service management once the application is live and rolled out to all traffic management centres. And the systems assurer is an independent technical assurance contract to kind of bolster the organisation's technical capability. And the last one on that slide there, the pre-commercial procurement, was about resolving some common challenges and collaborating with a few road authorities for the innovation stream of CHARM. So I will start with talking through the competitive dialogue. Within the new regulations, use of competitive dialogue has been, well, not encouraged, but it has been relaxed a bit more. Under the old regulations, you couldn't use it very often, or you had to have certain specific circumstances, but it has seemed to have been relaxed a bit more. We used this procedure before the regulations changed, so we published a notice in 2014 before the new regulations took place. So the general scope of the ATMS system provider contract was to provide a commercial off-the-shelf software package, but also with architecture that could integrate new features. As you've probably heard on a lot of these presentations, connected and autonomous vehicles are kind of on the horizon now for a lot of the member states and in a lot of our countries. So it was really not just about making sure that it replaced the existing applications, but also making sure that the architecture that was implemented was fit for the future, for integrating new features. Second bullet there, which was to replace all the traffic management sensor application estate with a single user interface, and then integrate any additional functionality to meet specific requirements. So as you can imagine, there were specific requirements that were unique to England and unique to Netherlands. So the core of the competition was to get a product that was generally pretty much the same in either country, but then also with some bolted on requirements to meet country specific. The initial contract period is of 3 years to fully implement the solution in the first traffic management centre, so that's all the configuration and the testing and any development of interfaces. You have to bear in mind as well, whilst it's a commercial off-the-shelf software package, they are implemented in a brownfield site. It's not as easy as just dropping it in. There is quite a bit of integration into the legacy hardware that's on the roadside. So yeah, 3 years to fully implement the solution, and then 2 data centre environments per country. Once this 3-year period is completed, they'd have an annual license agreement with third line support for a maximum of 12 years. Within the OG notice, we did also have scope for them to provide licenses under this OG notice for other road authorities upon request. And as I alluded to on the other slide, technical assurance is procured under separate contracts. So what does ATMS do? So clearly in our traffic management centres we do have a lot of kind of standalone applications. I can certainly say in England's case it replaces around 7 or 8 applications with a single application. It effectively does, ATMS undertakes information provision, which is kind of the kind of thing like DATEX2 feeds provide traffic management information to other road authorities. Dynamic traffic management, such as opening the hard shoulder, creating all lane running during peak periods. Incident management, so responding to incidents on the carriageway and deploying resources. Resource management, which is kind of rostering of traffic management centre staff and traffic officers. Event planning, which would be things like scheduling for major events like a concert or a football game, and what would our traffic management responses be to that. Contact management, which is contact through the ATMS interface to on-road resources. And lastly, it had to be customer configurable. So not a bespoke application, but a fairly COTS product that could be configured by the agencies themselves. So in terms of the procurement approach, obviously we did a competitive dialogue. I just thought it'd be useful to talk you through the timeline and kind of what we did from phase to phase. Initially we had the selection phase, which was May to July 2014, which aimed to identify 3 to 6 companies to participate in the competitive dialogue. Our pre-qualification questionnaire required a self-declaration, which is under the Dutch Procurement Act, as well as evidence of a quality management system, information security management system, and corporate social responsibility certification, or an appropriate international equivalent. They had to provide a description of their commercial off-the-shelf package, and 3 to 6 case studies from previous examples for different highway authorities for traffic management with similar capability and complexity. This had to cover the organisational fit of their product into those traffic management environments, the support organisation used to support that, and the functional and technical capability. So we received 10 responses, and we identified 4 pre-qualified companies to participate in the dialogue. It's worth noting actually that within competitive dialogue you do have the option to go to have a down select, so effectively a pre-qualification phase followed by an initial dialogue followed by a final dialogue, and down selecting through each of those phases. We chose to do the down select, whereas some other member states may choose just to go straight to the dialogue. So we undertook our initial dialogue phase in August to mid-December 2014. We had national and regional traffic management centre site visits with the bidders, and we had lots of face-to-face Q&A. Internally we undertook our competitive dialogue training, which was hosted by our legal counsel for the project. At the end of that phase we had presentations from the bidders themselves of their outline solutions, so effectively during this phase they were working up an outline solution to our requirements, and then we would down select on that basis. So we did down select 4 companies to 3. At this stage we only did it on quality and not price. We felt it was too early in the procedure to incorporate any price element into our assessment. So effectively, at the end of this initial dialogue phase, we did do a qualitative assessment and then down selected from 4 to 3. In the next phase, which was the final dialogue, which was the big chunk of the comparative dialogue, which was mid-December 2014 to mid-April 2015. We started off that phase by giving feedback to the bidders on their outline solutions and gave them a briefing of what the dialogue might look like. It's probably worth bearing in mind, let alone the agencies themselves, but a lot of these suppliers have had experience of competitive dialogue either. So we thought it was useful to give them a description of how this process is likely to work. The core of the dialogue was 6 weeks of detailed dialogue undertaken with 2 out of 5 work streams running concurrently. So we had one work stream which was around the functional requirements, and we had use cases that the bidders had to demonstrate their product's capability. We also had a non-functional requirements workshop which was around the kind of things like information security and scalability and architecture. We had a session on implementation plans, a session on service management once in operations, and then we had a separate session on the commercial and contractual elements. We also ran out-of-hours sessions around things like how to complete the finance model, what should their final tenders look like, kind of explain the links between the ATMS system provider and the PCP. We also held further traffic management centre visits for the suppliers. We asked for indicative pricing early February 2015 in order to inform the commercial discussions. It kind of gave us a starting point from where to work from in there. We also had a proof of concept where basically those companies visited RWS's test centre and installed their software and ran a limited proof of concept against a number of use cases. Once we had completed the 6 weeks of the detailed dialogue, we did have some teleconferences and video conferences to discuss any residual issues. And prior to closing dialogue, you'll see in the regulations that you do have to announce that you are closing dialogue. We asked for draft versions of bidders' final tenders, which were based on the final tenders. So we received those in late March and provided some informal feedback. Once we had closed the dialogue, the last phase was from mid-April 2015 to mid-August 2015, and this is where we invited tenders from the remaining companies. We gave 4 weeks for final tenders, which may seem quite short, but it's bearing in mind the bidders had been living with this for about a year by this point, and they'd already given us a draft final tender, so they were probably well along their way to giving us a completed tender. RWS begun their standstill in early July 2015 because it was the Dutch Procurement Act. They actually have a 20-day standstill period, and similarly Highwa's England, we began ours in mid-August after we received our internal approvals, and we also had a 20-day standstill period. So I just thought that'd be useful in terms of giving an overview of the phase-to-phase how the project worked. I mean, in terms of my opinions on the dialogue, I thought it was incredibly valuable, very useful. You get much more flexibility than an open and restricted, especially for something like this, which is a very long contract term and very important operationally and technically to the organisations. And definitely we achieved a lot of benefits through collaborating both organisations. We attracted quite a wide supply base. It enabled us to align requirements and kind of question our own thinking. Overall, we did reduce the procurement times and costs by running them concurrently as one procurement, or as opposed to 2 separate procurements, which would involve bidders bidding for both of those. It does create a stronger customer position for each of us and allows us to share best practice. And ultimately, we did get a good solution and a substantial cost saving. I mean, for me, I think these next couple of slides is the core of the presentation, the kind of lessons that we learned from running this dialogue. We have kind of had similar sessions with other UK road authorities and some other EU member states as well. In terms of the lessons we learned, it's really important to allow space in the dialogue to reflect on any discussions you have. I think everybody found it very intense. If you don't allow that space to pause and think, it can quite easily become overwhelming and you don't get the value out of the process because you're constantly running. So my advice would be to allow some space. Similarly, learn lessons from previous dialogues that you've run. We've actually run quite a few in Highways England, and I think the Dutch had done a couple at the time as well. So listen to the experts and listen to their opinions about how it might run. Some more practical points in terms of giving ample time to wrap up sessions at the end of the day and making sure they stay focused. They are quite long days. We did 8:30 until, we planned to do 8:30 a.m. until 5:30 p.m, but some days they ran quite a lot longer. We do need focus in those end of day wrap-ups. You do need to make sure whatever venue you use is specified correctly. It's quite important in terms of equal treatment and transparency, that you give everybody the same opportunity and that they have the same rooms, the same access to the same facilities. It's also helpful to make sure that when you're doing your programming, you actually give ample time to the company's internal governance. If it's something that's a complex requirement like charm, the likelihood is they're going to have multiple hoops to jump through in terms of internal governance, and we need to make sure that you allow ample time for that. I would say that you want to make sure that your dialogue approach makes the best use of the time allotted. Granted, this was a first for quite a few of us, so potentially there probably was the potential to make better use. For example, if you're doing a procurement for functional software, I think it's definitely worth doing site visits to the existing customers as opposed to just having those. So you see them in an operational environment, so you don't just see them in the dialogue. I think there's probably the proof of concept we probably could have used a bit more valuably. It was a very valuable thing to do, but it probably could have contributed towards the assessment that had some more weight. We would advise to co-locate wherever possible and practical. I think competitive dialogue forces you to co-locate, if I'm honest, because it's pretty impossible to do over technology, because a lot of it is about relationships. But yeah, wherever possible, I think that's my advice. Kind of touching on previous points, but you need to make sure it's planned realistically. As you can see below, this is just an example, and there's no shame in us showing this. We did have a very kind of condensed initial schedule, which was from May 2014 to February 2015, but as you can see, as we got further into the dialogue, it kept shifting to the right slightly. I would say, but in our experience now, I think having done about 4 or 5, I think there's definitely a case for it. It's going to, depending on how complex the requirement is, so you should definitely allot yourself a year, because you need that time to process tender questions and do contract amendments and all that kind of thing. So, as I say, it's best to do it realistically at the outset as to avoid any unnecessary reprogramming. In terms of document control, it's very important to make sure that you do give yourself that time to pause, because you will be unless you've got unlimited resources and unlimited time, which I can't imagine most public sector procurers do, you need to give ample time to the document production and the peer review. It's really important, otherwise you will just end up doing it out of hours, making mistakes, etc. I think it's worth acknowledging that the dialogue and the action resolution and your question and answers and producing the documents and the peer review and a million and other things will all take place concurrently. So you need to make sure that you kind of have a back office team that can deal with things whilst the discipline leads are actually in the dialogue. To support that, I would say you need to use fit for purpose kind of requirements management tools if you are doing a functional software procurement. And it's really important to make sure your data room and your due diligence tools are adequately populated. So in our context, we had a data room which had access to all our current functional specifications, current business processes, any scalability data. I think it's no shame in admitting at the beginning it was probably not organised too well, but it did get better as the dialogue went on. But I think it's really key because it really helps bidders, especially ones who don't necessarily know your operational environment, to look through those documents at the outset of the procurement. Coming on to roles and responsibilities, one thing that's absolutely mandatory, I think, it's definitely need these kind of relationship building sessions within your procurement teams, because you are going to be spending a lot of time together, especially if you're co-locating. I mean, we effectively decamped big swathes of Rochester and Highways England to Birmingham for around 6 to 12 weeks. It's a long time, so you need to have those good relationships and a collaborative and open environment. And to support that, I think you need to clearly define who's responsible for what and when they should be doing it. It will just help you resolve issues down the line and manage risks and make sure that whoever's attending the session actually has the authority to make a decision once they're there. You will not get any value from the process if the people who are there can't really make that many decisions when they turn up. In terms of the procurement process itself, you do need to take great care when you're thinking about issuing agendas and minutes. So the minutes of the session should really just capture the key points, because there are going to be a lot of sessions. So you need to make sure they capture the key points and not, not War and Peace and absolutely everything that's involved. You need to make sure the sessions are focused and you give companies a lot of time to prepare. There's nothing worse than dumping a bunch of documents on somebody and saying you've got to have read those by next Monday. It's not going to be appreciated. In fairness, you're not going to get the value because the companies wouldn't have had time to prepare. One thing we did do, which we found very helpful, was kind of sharing any conclusions and positions that we were reaching with companies on a weekly basis as we went through the process, so they can measure their progress. But we found that very helpful. It kind of gave a bit of a steer to whoever was the bid director. If you are going to have a dialogue, you do need to make sure you've got the relevant disciplines in the room. You want your commercial, technical and operational representatives, and you do want a correct blend of what is temporary staff and who is permanent staff. And they need to be engaged early in the project and attend each of the sessions, otherwise there's the potential for disconnect between each of the disciplines. So I think it's really important to make sure that you have the core people and the core disciplines represented at each session. Tender documents and any of your related tender processes, such as your assessment, you do need to make sure these are kind of proportionate for the requirement that you're procuring. We did have a kind of retained cost and risk adjustment within ours. So retained cost would be any cost that either of the agencies would bear based on the tender solution, but given the value of the contract, it was probably likely a bit too complex for what we were trying to achieve. And likewise, the pre-qualification questionnaire, it had quite a high bar, so we did have some queries about how SMEs could be involved. Last slide on the ATMS system provider then. I wouldn't assume that all the companies understand your current operational landscape. You do need to give them ample time for due diligence, otherwise you are already favouring your incumbents. You do need to give them, in terms of transparency and fair equal treatment, you do need to make sure they've got every opportunity that everybody else does. It's also worth noting that not all project team members will have experience of undertaking procurement. If you are working with traffic management centre operators, the likelihood is they've probably never done that much tender assessment or undertaken procurement at all, to be honest. So I do find it very helpful to make sure that at the outset of the procurement that everybody you're working with has got kind of a level playing field and is all on the same kind of capability level. Last couple of points, I would say try and refrain from defining too much of the overall scope of your competition at the outset of the competitive dialogue. Otherwise, you don't leave yourself very much to dialogue. Yeah, I'll try and keep it to an outline scope and work it up as you go along. Otherwise, again, you don't get much value from the process. And lastly, the last thing I would say on the matter is make sure your market engagement targets all the required capabilities. For example, within Charm, there were obviously country-specific requirements, such as in England we have a requirement to connect to police systems, and Netherlands have their own radio system. So they were quite specific to us. So as part of the market engagement, it's really important to make sure that you are targeting all the kind of market sectors that you need to. Right, lastly, I've got a few slides on pre-commercial procurement, and then we'll take some questions. So obviously, this is not a procedure that is listed in the ODU procurement directives, the EU procurement directive.
Neil, can I just jump in now, because we've had a couple of questions, and I think maybe we take these questions before you go to the next part, if that's all right?
Yeah, of course, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, so we have a question from Mike Hayward, who's saying cost saving was stated as a benefit. How was this verified? I think that was referring back to one of your slides.
So this was against the cost of us both countries individually going out for competitive dialogue.
Yeah.
So that's how we verified that cost saving.
So you looked at how much it would have cost if you'd done it separately, and you think it was cheaper to do it together?
Absolutely, yeah, and because I think even if both companies had done it individually, we still would have had some kind of negotiation or face-to-face dialogue. So the chances are each country would have done a competitive dialogue or negotiated procedure, and traditionally they are quite expensive procedures to run. So by having a single procedure, it kind of concentrates the suppliers on one opportunity. So that's how we validated that.
Great. Okay, Mike says okay. Question from Julianne Shirahasi says, would we like to share the slides? Yes, we'll be sharing the slides, and understand that the video will be online. And then we have a question from Lars Stender. You asked technical visits to the participants, existing customers during the dialogue phase. Oh, sorry, you asked about technical visitors to the participants' existing customers during the dialogue phase. Were these visits a plan from the start and announced to the participants, and how did you choose where to visit and how many? Did you visit the same number of customers for each participant?
I'd actually, I think my point now was a lesson learned that it's something we didn't do that much of, if I'm honest. We didn't actually do site visits to existing customers during the competitive dialogue. We did a limited, view of existing, things like Trafex and Intertraffic at viewing the capabilities of these existing products, where we didn't actually go to see an operational traffic management centre prior to the procurement, as my understanding. So we didn't actually do it during the procedure. My advice would be actually, before you consider doing a competitive dialogue and what you want to dialogue, is to do these visits to the existing customers before you even publish your due notice. So you get that.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, because in it you said you wanted a commercial off-the-shelf system and evidence from 3 to 6 highway authorities with similar capabilities and complexities, which kind of, well, I was kind of contrasting that with saying we're being innovative here, because why did you judge 3 to 6, and if it's 3 to 6, is it going to be then a fairly mature product, or how would you balance the fact that you want something new and innovative with the fact that you do want this, substantial evidence that it's been used before?
So I think you're quite right, Steve. I think the 3 to 6 was around the finding a mature product that had been used in a similar environment to de-risk our project. Yeah. And then the architecture being in such a way that we could integrate new products into that. Which is why PCP is a kind of a separate stream, because the kind of whole purpose of PCP is to integrate those modules into the ATMS platform, and that was looking more at the innovation side to make sure that we've bought this product and we prove that it does our requirements in an operational environment, and it also has the architecture to integrate new and innovative solutions. So effectively, yes, that barrier was very high at the outset of procurement, and that was in order to buy a very mature product and de-risk our respective implementations.
Right, so you weren't necessarily looking for an implementation of the complete product. It could have been different modules, and then looking at how they might fit together, being used in different environments. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So we expected that the core of the functionality would be absorbed by one product, and potentially, there was a few other things that they had to bolt onto their existing product.
Okay, thank you very much.
Neil, sorry, and it's Ying here from Article. I have a couple of questions. During the dialogue phase, after you pre-qualified your tenders and you only down to from 4 to 3, and then you ask your bidders to provide proof of concept. During this phase, is there any budget for the bidders, or they do everything for free?
We had €50,000 each for the proof of concept, but that was the only tendering costs that we reimbursed. I mean, the new regulations have relaxed somewhat about giving compensation, because they recognise reimbursing expenses, because they recognise that competitive dialogue is an expensive procedure for suppliers. So during our procedure specifically, we had 50,000 per bidder.
Okay, thank you. And then for the proof of concept, when you receive all this information, do you share with among the tenders, or it's only between you and the tender?
So sorry, could you repeat that, Yang Ying. Do you mean sharing feedback with them on the proof of concept?
So if you receive the information about proof of concept, they develop the proof of concept, is only this document only delivered to you, or other tenders could see that as well?
No, it's only delivered to us because you have to be very careful in competitive dialogue to make sure you're not kind of blurring the lines between solutions and revealing things to one participant that is based on one participant's solution. So no, the proof of concepts, the proof of concept were basically each supplier would have half a day preparation, half a day doing demonstrating their proof of concept in the RWS test centre, and it was the agencies viewing just one company at a time, and those weren't shared.
Okay, thanks for that, Neil. Well, I think we'll let you get on with the next part of your presentation then.
Cool, that's super. Right. Well, I will talk you through pre-commercial procurement. It's probably a fair comment to say that you've probably been through this a few times on kind of vertical type presentations. So pre-commercial procurement isn't a procedure within the EU procurement directives. It's if it's classified as R&D, it operates outside of that. So the purpose of the Charm PCP was to create new, as I was explaining now, was to create new modules for the Charm architecture. So in a PCP, you publish challenges and you do it with a number of road authorities. So it's actually Flanders, Rijkswaterstaat and Highways England. We had 3 challenges, as you can see there. So the Advanced Distributed Network Management. We had challenge 2, which was around the detection and prediction of incidents. And challenge 3, which was the support of cooperative ITS and CAV type functions. So in our Charm PCP, we had 3 phases, as you normally do in a PCP. The number of companies is reduced throughout the phases as a result of the competition between them. Within each of our phases, we had one or more of the following. So we had a mid-term demonstration where the companies would show their progress halfway through a phase, and an end-of-phase demonstration where they would show their final offering before submitting their end-of-phase report. And we also had a feasibility report or an end-of-phase report. But this was formally assessed using a quality price ratio and determined which suppliers proceeded to the subsequent phases of the project. I'm sure you'll know this diagram famously. So effectively, we have undertaken phase 1, 2 and 3. We haven't yet made a decision about whether we're going to proceed with phase 4. It all depends on what the results are at the end of this phase 3. So phase 4 is essentially a PPI, which is a traditional procurement. So from phase 1 we had 11 suppliers, which went to 8 suppliers in phase 2, and now in phase 3 we have 6 suppliers. So again, it's quite a long procedure. We agreed our grant with the 3 parties and the Commission in 2012. We had the phase 1 competition from September 2013, and we awarded framework agreements for the PCP to 11 companies in February 2014. Between February and October 2014, we did have a period where we assessed the feasibility of their solutions to proceed to phase 2, and the outcome of that was April 2015, where we had 8 successful companies commencing phase 2. February last year, we had the phase 2 demonstrations where they showed us the progress they've made in integrating these projects into the ATMS product. And in order to determine who proceeded to the final phase, we had a competition in June 2016. So where we are around now, we're doing the phase 3 demonstrations in a couple of weeks in Helmond, in the Netherlands, and then we'll be concluding our Charm PCP by August 2017. So lessons learned. This can actually, even though it's not subject to the procurement regs, it can be very complex procedure, especially when you're considering IPR and definitions of state aid and research and development. It can be very complex, and even once you're in the procedure, a lot of these companies aren't actually that used to doing these, especially in our case anyway. So it's useful to share those conclusions as you go on and let them know what happens in each phase and what's going to happen after the PCP. A lot of questions we've had is what happens next. You do need to have those regular face-to-face sessions to build relationships and understanding between you and the companies. And you want to, again, it's really key that you give them ample time to prepare, because you'll suffer as a result if they're not given enough time. Similarly, you do want some time for team building within your own PCP consortium. Luckily, we three road authorities had already kind of spent a lot of time together anyway. But if it was a fresh PCP, you would want to make sure that you're spending a lot of time together. We found that we've allocated individual supervisors to each of the challenges and to each of the companies within each of those challenges. So, for example, if there's 2 companies within a single challenge, each of those companies have a dedicated supervisor from the agencies. We found that that's been very successful because it's kind of a go-to person for the companies and a go-to person for the rest of the program, and that's really helped to build team spirit. Where you've got a pre-commercial procurement linked to a bigger program like ATMS, you do need to allow some float within the PCP. So the reason I've put these 2 examples together is that we've had some delays in PCP just essentially because of how compact the initial competitive dialogue planning was, and you do need to allow for a bit more float within your program. Any PCP deliverables that you are specifying, so for example testing in a live environment, you do want to make sure that these are technically achievable at the earliest stage possible. So not over-promising what you can promise to the PCP companies, making sure that you've got all the facilities ready and you know what your possibilities are at the outset in terms of anything that you're going to provide to the companies. It's definitely very important to pay attention to any necessary arrangements for things like non-disclosure agreements. It's really important when you're talking in intellectual property rights. Essentially, some of these companies might be competitors with each other and are very cagey about sharing their IPR. So I think that's a legitimate concern. So it's something you need to consider at the outset. One other thing you may want to consider is accepting more companies in phase 1. We did have 11, but there is always a risk that the fewer you have in subsequent phases. So you may want to accept more early on, so you do have more competition. Similar to the competitive dialogue, you do need to know your roles, responsibilities and escalation procedures from the outset. It will help resolve any risks or any challenges as you go down the procedure. Similarly, the PCPs, as you can see, are started in 2012 and it's now 2017. They can span quite a lot of time actually, so you do need to make sure that you have, for the sake of the project, that you have sufficient resource, capacity and succession throughout each of those phases. I couldn't stress that enough actually. We've had quite a few where you're changing people out, people moving on to different jobs. It can't be helped, of course, but wherever possible you need to make sure that you've got people shadowing so it's not too much of a shock. Last couple of points I would make is engaging with the Commission and who undertake your grant agreement and any other road authorities you're working with throughout. The co-location is very good, keeping them up to date throughout the progress. I think we've actually done a fairly good job of that in our PCP. And lastly, I would just add that your assessment procedure is proportionate and fit for purpose. We do, within our PCP, we do have quite a lot of assessment criteria. I think we've got about 11 in total, and I think people have found that initially quite a lot to deal with. We also had a fairly big weighting on price, I believe it's 40%, which for an R&D you could argue is not very much in the spirit of research and development. So these are just things that I would suggest bearing in mind if you are using competitive dialogue or pre-commercial procurement to run any activities. These are things I would bear in mind, and that's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Neil. That was very informative. We're just looking to see if there's any questions online, but I know that Yang Ying, sitting beside me, has some questions that she's dying to ask you, so I'll let her fire away.
Thanks, Neil, and that's an excellent presentation. A question, you mentioned about sharing IPR, but in the reality could be the opposite. It's an innovative solution, but it did not lead to commercial product. And you select something and you think it's good, but at the end the company decided to not give you the solution. Would that be possible, and how you could prevent such case?
How we've handled it in this PCP is that we have a license to use their project IPR, but the companies themselves own the IPR to their solutions. The issues we faced, I guess, is when you're integrating with third-party projects who are kind of independent of PCP, of your PCP, it's the complexities around exchanging information between those companies, and that's where the confidentiality issues come in. Effectively in ours, yes, we've had our IPR is kind of shared as you go through the development, and it becomes the contractors at the end of the PCP. But we do always have a perpetual license to use the IPR.
So in your criteria, in your selection criteria, do you value the future of such solutions or products? Did you take those factors in?
Yeah, we had an assessment criteria for the kind of fit for the future kind of type thing, Yang. So it was around they had to give us a response about how their solution would contribute towards kind of societal challenges that we'd raised in our challenge brief. So that was one of the criteria.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Well, we're looking over the screen, but there's no more questions out there. I just got a little quick one, I guess. Is on one of your slides you mentioned the questions were raised about whether SMEs were maybe disadvantaged. I just wonder if you could expand on how we might, or how you might have encouraged SMEs a little bit more, or not.
I think it's the question we went back to about product maturity, because if you've managed to deploy a product in 3 to 6 comparable environments, and given that this charm ATMS is a national system, and the chances are you would have to, there's only so many countries in the world, so there's only so many places you could have deployed it. So that's quite a high criteria for. I imagine it's quite a high criteria for a small company to meet. If you're below 250 people, could you potentially have rolled a solution out in 3 different countries in the last preceding 3 years? Probably quite a challenge. I think if anything, probably perhaps lowered that and had more participants at the beginning, and maybe a bit more of a focus on functional capabilities. Again, I think it's symptomatic of the strategy to provide a very mature product. But yeah, I think some of the questions we had early on in that PQQ phase was around whether that was very SME friendly. So I think that there's got to be other ways of including. We could have other tender questions about how the prime contractor is going to engage SMEs within their supply chain. That could be one way of doing it. Incentives in the contract for working with small companies as well, if it's a prime contractor. I think there are other ways of doing it. It's just perhaps in our case, maybe the barriers couldn't be absolutely certain, but it might be quite difficult for some SMEs to meet that very high barrier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then just find. I mean, okay, you said that for you, it was a much more cost-effective process to do it in collaboration with Rijksvaarderstat. But I just wondered if you had any further comments on the benefits of the cross-border procurement and the difficulties, and I guess also, does Rijksvaarderstat agree with you that it was cost-effective?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've had. I mean, some of the lessons learned from here are based on sessions we've had together. We've had our own internal kind of lessons learned. We've also had lessons learned sessions with successful and unsuccessful tenderers as part of this procurement. So yeah, I think it's the feedback we've had. I think the main driver for us is that because the two countries collaborated on this project, it did have a big bearing on kind of non-EU companies bringing their solutions over to this, because it's kind of a start. It's a way into a market. So the main feedback we had is that it was very positive in terms of incentivizing people to make that foray into the European market. Yeah.
Sorry, so you're saying there was almost like a publicity. Well, I won't say publicity is probably the wrong word, but an awareness raising by the fact that these two countries working together, you've attracted in European entities into the bidding process. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very fair observation that, yeah, by combining it makes it twice as attractive to somebody who may have previously not considered bidding for European opportunities. So yeah, definitely the buying power is definitely increased by working together.
Okay, that's great. So what's your suggestions for what's next? What comes next?
In terms of Charm, we're carrying on in terms of the rolling that out and the supporting procurements for each of those. We're also doing work with on another EU project called Intercore with some other road authorities, which is around more of the Lot 3 things from the PCP we've recently done, so the kind of connected autonomous vehicles type thing. So it's building on that, really, building on the things. I think PCP is a very interesting procedure for new technologies and new solutions that aren't perhaps commercialised or perhaps there's a restricted marketplace. So we're trying to kind of influence our policymakers into using that as much as possible.
That's an interesting connection you make with Intercore. So do you see this kind of collaborative venture as some kind of model for further developments on the 10T corridors?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's in order to most of the deliverables out of these connected autonomous vehicle trials are kind of around interoperability, and I think you can only really truly achieve interoperability if you're doing cross-border activity and you're doing it across traffic management borders, even within a domestic country. So I definitely see these as a precursor to more collaboration. Yes, I think it's the only way you can kind of harmonise it across the member states.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, Neil. Oh, sorry, there's one final question from Rian van der Knap. Do you think the PCP procedure was more effective than any other procedure might have been?
It depends on the requirement, to be perfectly honest. I think there's a really useful guide that the EU have produced. It's the EAFIP guide, the European Assistance for Innovation Procurement, and I think in there it does have it kind of has a few kind of flow charts about when you might want to consider this procedure. I definitely think for things, it de-risks follow-on procurements. I think the PCP, I think it's very useful in that respect, where you can work with suppliers to develop solutions and it helps to commercialize them. So when you come to your full procurement, you've effectively given yourself the best opportunity possible to have a successful rollout. So yeah, I definitely think PCP is a very valuable tool for solving problems where there isn't solutions yet.
Okay, so thank you very much again. No, we're just checking for final questions. Right. Well, everyone, I think on behalf of all of the attendees, thank you, Neil Widdop. It's been a very good presentation about what Highways England has been doing in the Charm project and your cooperation with Rijkswaterstaat and other colleagues. I want to thank Jan Ying for organising this webinar through the SPICE project, which I'm told to repeat the little buzzword, which is smart procurement for better transport. So there's a little plug for the SPICE project. The video of this, I'm told, will be uploaded to YouTube fairly soon, so you'll be able to link to that through the SPICE website. And I hope, well, if you really want to run through the whole presentation again, I'm sure you can enjoy it. But that's it for us this afternoon. I think this is me, Steve Phillips from CEDA, signing off from Brussels. Thank you all very much.